So hello, everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Robin Dougherty, and as Michael said, I'm the librarian for Middle East Studies here at Yale. I have been here more than 10 years, and I've spent, this was my first opportunity to work with a collection of this kind in my 30-year career as a professional Middle East Studies librarian. I've been able to encounter just such a wealth and variety of items. And I'm still exploring. I find I learn something new every single day, basically, that I work here with regard to the collections. I'm going to take you on a bit of a whirlwind trip. In the exhibit mandate, we were all of us asked to choose something that we thought was cool, or something we thought was neat, or something that had a particular story to tell. And I settled pretty quickly on the items I wanted to feature. And so we are going to go from the early 19th century encounters with Africa, and we are going to, at the end of the half hour, we will end up in late 20th century France and with Iraqi surrealism. So hang on to your hats, here we go. Hope this works great. Okay, so I'm going to start with a very prosaic item, which is this map of Africa, which has attracted me for a long time because I mean, first off, not only is it simply visually attractive, but I was amazed at the great detail on the coasts compared with, basically the apparent emptiness of the interior of the continent. And of course, I probably don't need to explain why that is, but it is because it represents what Europeans knew about the continent. And in a way, in addition to indicating their supposed knowledge about the continent, it also is a profound example of their profound ignorance about the continent. This map was created by a Scottish geographer, Alexander Keith Johnston. You can see his dates on the slide. He had a particular interest in Humboldtian science, which had an emphasis on great accuracy and description, and particularly description of the environment. Our friend Johnston was also an explorer whose life sadly ended when he was leading an expedition to Lake Malawi. And I'm going to see if I can make this go so that I can go straight to the collection item. This is the item as it appears in our collection, in our digital collections, so that I can zoom in on Lake Malawi, which he has transcribed differently. So it probably reflects a local pronunciation of that word. But also notice that it's kind of foggy, it's a little vague. So at the time this map was made in 1849, they knew that there was a lake there, but they weren't real sure how big or precisely where it was and this kind of thing. But also I want to direct your attention to something else, which is missing from this map. Whoop, go back here. Something really large should be in the center, right about at the equator, and it's not there. Now, since I can't interact with you, I'll just tell you that they hadn't yet, the European explorers had not yet discovered Lake Victoria. So it wasn't discovered until, or described, in other words, by Europeans until, what did I say, 1858. 1858 is the date for that. And Johnston did publish updated maps. So in addition to this one published in 1849, he did publish another one that he updated. And there you can see there is Lake Victoria, very nicely situated where it ought to be. And the other thing that I really love about this, I'm going to go backwards just for 1 second. The picture's too small for you to see, but although it exposes a lot of European ignorance about the continent, one thing it does very nicely is include so many local names for the places that are indicated on the map. So in all of the different regional local languages of the continent, place names are expressed in those terms as opposed to overwhelmingly the European names that were given later. So this is one reason I really like this map. Now, in connection with this, I have a story to tell about a gentleman named Omar ibn Said. Now his story, oops, there goes my lights. Lights come back on. Some of you may have heard of this gentleman. He's attracted a lot of media attention, sort of like in waves over the years. And I think particularly maybe in the last 10 years, there's been a renewed interest in this gentleman's life. Now, if you were looking at our collections online, you would see the image. So it's right here in the top center. This is a photograph, a portrait of Omar ibn Said, approximately made in 1850. The date is uncertain, in the context of the other items that are also in this same collection. So this is the Randolph, Linsly, Simpson collection, which is a really remarkable collection of over 700 photographs of African Americans, basically vacuumed up by this collector wherever he found them. And you can see from the captions that in many cases, we don't know who took the photograph. And in many cases, we don't even know who the people are in the photographs. The collector didn't care. He found images of African Americans and he added them to his collection. And interestingly, amongst all of these photographs of, sailors and, beautiful social studio photographs of little children, is this one photograph of this really remarkable character that I'm about to tell you a little bit more about right now. So this is him, Omar ibn Said. His dates are there. So he was born in what is now Senegal in 1770, and he was abducted at the age of 37 and enslaved and brought across the ocean and enslaved in North Carolina. That is sort of where his encounter with America began, and how his encounter with America begins. This photograph, well, it's not a photograph, I'll be precise about it. It is actually an ambrotype. I'm not an expert on the kinds of photographs, but I'm sure there are people out there who know a lot about this, so I want to be precise. An ambrotype is on glass, but it can only be made visible if you put some dark material behind it. So that is how we are able to visualize, to see the image that is etched on this glass, is because it's put on top of a dark backing. Now on the back of the photograph is this very interesting note in pencil, which identifies him by the name Uncle Moreau. And his name was Omar, but apparently the name got, either it was his dialect pronunciation or people just couldn't hear Omar correctly. And it was often rendered by Americans as Moreau or Moreau or variations of this kind. And the note says he was a slave of great notoriety of North Carolina, a scholar who once wrote me a letter in Arabic and sent me his picture, a sketch of his life. And then it mentions that there were publications about him in these two American missionary publications. Now, the first thing, much about the legacy of Omar ibn Said is basically a question mark, just full of questions. First off, with regard to this note, who is me? Who is the me to whom a picture and a letter were sent? We don't know who that was. I don't know if the collector, Linsly Simpson, if he knew when he found this photograph who Omar ibn Said was at that point. That is a question that I don't know the answer to. Let me see, what else do I want to say? When the author of the note says he sent me his picture, a sketch of his life, does he mean this picture? Does he mean that this picture somehow is the sketch of his life, or is he referring to another document? Now, there are documents related to Omar ibn Said around the country in various places. We have this photograph and we have a letter, which I'll talk to you about in 1 second because it's also in the exhibit. There is a very famous autobiography written by Omar ibn Said, obviously, that is now held in the Library of Congress after it had sort of made many movements and disappeared for a while even. There are other letters held in various state archives and university library archives in North Carolina and South Carolina. So he has left behind, interestingly, this legacy, a written legacy. But what is interesting particularly is that this written legacy is in Arabic. So that is what is extraordinary and interesting about this particular person. So I'm going to go back to my terrible map of Africa that I showed you a little while ago, because since it was published in 1849, it was published, during a period of time when Omar, he was still enslaved, he was living in the United States, and this is sort of basically what it was possible for Americans and Europeans to know about the country where Omar ibn Said originated. And I have circled the probable location. He said he in one of his documents, he says he came from Futa Toro, between the two rivers. which is supposed to be on the west coast of Africa, somewhere on the Senegal River, is where his origins are. Let me see, this is very quickly an image. This is not at Yale. This is the autobiography that is held at the Library of Congress. Along with the other documents and along with the other things I've already said, it raises a lot of questions. There is a lot to read about Omar ibn Said, very easy to find, terrific, good quality information on the web. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but one of the questions that his writings raises is when he was captured, he was a Muslim. He was educated in Arabic. He knew how to read the Quran, and he knew other religious texts as well that he had memorized. When he was brought to North Carolina and enslaved, at a certain point after his arrival, he allegedly converted to Christianity. And the question is, from his writings, where he's quoting from the Quran and he's, quoting, the Bismillah in the name of God. If you can read Arabic, you can see it at the top of this document. The question is, how sincere was his conversion? Was it just a formal matter, just to sort of get along with the people that he had to interact with, the white people that he had to interact with? Do his writings indicate that he was still secretly a Muslim, or what exactly? And all of these are questions that I think are very hard to answer. And the other thing that I wanted to indicate is that you have to also remember that Omar's Arabic was not his native language. His native language was probably Fulfulde, or a language of his home country. He learned Arabic in Africa in order to read the Quran. And then he was brought to North Carolina and enslaved, where he basically acquired English somehow. So his Arabic, not only is it not his native tongue, it was learned for a particular purpose in order to practice his religion. And then he was divorced from his own language and Arabic, his native language and Arabic, for several decades before he wrote this autobiography. So the Arabic is, let's say, it's difficult. I've put a little translation here. I've made it quite literal. You'll see that the cases they don't quite agree. And I've provided a transcription, the Arabic script there. If you can read Arabic, you can see exactly what the problems are. And I won't go into that because there's lots to read about it elsewhere. But his Arabic is not, if it ever was fluent, it is no longer fluent by the time he is called upon to create these documents, which is very interesting, I think. On the left, you see an item from our collection, which is in the exhibit. So this is a letter. And let's see, there's a lot of details about this. The letter was written in 1819. So it happens to be the oldest document related to Omar ibn Said that is known. As I said, there's other documents. This one is the oldest, and it's here at Yale. It has some very interesting characteristics. Before I go on to talk about the content of the letter, I wanted to talk a little bit about how it looks. I have encountered some questions about, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this decorative element that is in the middle, that looks, to my mind, it looks like this sort of lattice work that you see very often in Middle Eastern countries over windows. That's called mashrabiyah. That was the first thing I thought of when I saw it. But if you look at manuscripts that are made in African and Sub-Saharan and North African countries, East and West Africa, you see these kind of braided decorative elements as headings in various kinds of texts. So on the right is an example, not from our collections, it's from a Sotheby's auction catalog of an item that was created, let's see, this one was created in Sudan, I believe. And let me see, on the left, these are two other Omar ibn Said documents that are held elsewhere, not at Yale. You can see visually how similar the writing is, between one another. The use of that lattice work design, again, as sort of a way to separate the text. Often I've heard these things described as amulets. They aren't. They are very characteristic of African manuscript production. They don't have this sort of mystical element. People seem to really want that. That's not necessarily what they're there for. So this is just some examples that I found, mostly from, these are all from our own collections, showing again examples of this style of African Arabic script, which bear a lot of similarities to Omar's own handwriting, and also again that braided sort of heading coming from a manuscript from Egypt, this very, very common decorative element. And the other thing I wanted to comment on very quickly too was the strangeness possibly that Omar experienced in writing these documents. He would have been using, as you see on the left, a steel pen of the type very commonly used in, basically everybody wrote with a steel pen and an ink pot. But in Middle Eastern countries and in Africa, people wrote with a reed qalam. And qalam is an Arabic word for pen, and that word, everybody uses it regardless of what language they speak, they say qalam. I'm sure that holding a qalam and writing with a qalam are very different experiences than writing with a steel pen. So that is something else that Omar would have experienced that would have kind of divorced him from the knowledge that he had from his own experience of writing and creating written documents. So now I'm going to tell the story of this letter. So the letter with the interlaced design. Oh, there go my lights again. Come on. Oh my God. This is what it means to live with a motion sensor. So I'll tell the story very quickly of the letter and its journey. So the letter was addressed to James Owen, who to James Owen's brother. Now, James Owen was the person who basically sort of helped to bring Omar into some fame and notoriety. Omar had been, after he had been enslaved, he had been mistreated by the first enslaver. He escaped. He was captured and put in prison in North Carolina, where he started writing on the walls of his cell in Arabic. And everybody in town said, what is this person doing? First off, he is Black and he is writing, and slaves are not supposed to know how to read and write. So he's writing, but then they said, what is he writing? They didn't recognize it. Nobody knew it was Arabic. Anyway, so James Owen there on the, James Owen was the brother of the gentleman on the left, John Owen. James Owen heard about this person and basically purchased him from the previous enslaver in order to get him out of jail and get him away from the abusive situation he'd been in. And then it was James and his brother John who basically ensured Omar's fame by saying, encouraging him to continue to write, introducing him to people, having him write things for them, all in Arabic. And, so this is how he began to create this trove of documents that, have become scattered around the country. So the letter that's at Yale was written to James Owen's brother, John. So that's the gentleman on the left. He would be the future governor of North Carolina. I've put all the details there, so I'm not going to repeat them. The letter, John Owen then sent the letter on to his buddy, John Lewis Taylor, who was the Chief Justice of North Carolina, saying, can you help me find somebody who can read what this says? And well, John Lewis Taylor didn't know for sure, but he said, let's try, let's just try Francis Scott Key. The guy who wrote the Star Spangled Banner. Surely he would know somebody who knew Arabic. I mean, it's sort of the way of people trying to find like you see this on the internet now. Can anybody read this for me? And you send this out to all your friends, and maybe one of your friends has the right connection. Well, Francis Scott Key did. He happened to know Moses Stewart, who was basically America's first Orientalist. He was an Arabist and a Hebraist. He was a scholar and a professor at the Andover Theological Seminary. So that's how the letter came to Yale. It eventually made its way to Moses Stewart. Moses Stewart donated the letter to the Andover Seminary before he died. Let's see, I wrote it down and now I don't have the date in front of me, but in the 1830s. And then it remained at the Andover Theological Seminary in Massachusetts until the foundation of the Andover Newton Seminary at Yale in 2017, when all of these collections came to Yale. And that's a very common story with collections of this kind. The repository closes or transforms, and its collections then are transferred to another repository. And that is what happened with this letter from Omar. So let's remind ourselves what that letter looked like. This is it. It contains, it's only 2 pages, it's a folio sheet, and the content is only on 2 sides of the folio. And it contains quotations from verses of the Quran. I've counted, there are 8 different verses that are quoted. I'm sorry, 8 different chapters from the Quran that are quoted. And it also includes quotations from 2 classical works of Arabic grammar. So Omar is somehow kind of downloading this knowledge that he had in his head onto this piece of paper. it's difficult to find sort of like an overarching theme. There have been questions about whether the excerpts specifically address the concept that like slavery is bad, or if they address the concept that men should not own one another. There are certainly ways to support this assertion, but overall, as a document, it reads as, I would say, sort of an intellectual download by Omar to his the family of his enslavers that eventually ended up in Andover Theological Seminary. Let me see, go on from here. I have to go quickly because I've already talked far too much about this. He was provided with a Quran. I think it's very interesting that the Quran that was provided for him was in English. And it happens to be the same edition as the one that Thomas Jefferson owned. I don't know if you've heard Thomas Jefferson's Quran. It would have been this, for those who know Quran translations, it would have been the Sale translation in the 1811, I'm sorry, yeah, this one is 1821, but it's a much older, it's an 18th century translation of the Quran into English. And then he was also given a Bible in Arabic. So you can imagine, so you're a person of a particular faith, and someone gives you a copy of your own holy text in a language that is not your first language, it's not even your second language, it's in the third language that you learned. And then they give you a copy of their holy text in your second language. It seems to me that there's a lot of opportunity for some interesting things happening in Omar's head as a result of being exposed to this kind of text. This is the report of his death, very simply published in the Fayetteville Observer in 1863, underneath the story of a stable burning down from lightning. But if Omar's fame would come in the future. I thought it was interesting, I ran into this. The American Oriental Society also has ties to Yale, decades long. And a document of Omar's, one of his legacies, was shown at a meeting of the American Oriental Society, which, as you can see, it caused the American Orientalists to have quite a few remarks on the extent of the use of Arabic language in Africa. Like, they didn't even know how many Africans would know Arabic, and they were shown this document and at their meetings. I thought that was interesting. Omar has entered popular culture. There's this wonderful production which is based on his writings and his life. And I think what's really interesting is they used the writings for the stage design. I think that's amazing. And I'm going to see this in Boston in May myself. I'm very, very excited about this. So it's a fictionalized retelling of the Omar ibn Said story based on his extant documents, scholarship, and some creative license, let's say. But anyway, you can learn about that. There's a lot on the web about it as well. Okay, so I'll move very quickly into Iraqi surrealism. So I have to be very, very quick about this because I'm running out of time. So I'm going to talk to you about two periodicals that are on display in the exhibit. One is called Al-Raghbah al-ibahiyah, which basically means libertine desire. And the other one is called Faradis, which means paradises, plural of paradise. And they were established by the gentleman, you see him, sort of a fairly contemporary photograph on the right, Abdul Qadir al-Janabi. He was born in Baghdad in 1944. He left Iraq in order to come to Europe to find freedom and intellectual expression that he could not find in Iraq. And he found a bunch of comrades in the arts. And you can see there the photograph of sort of the core group. One of them in the middle is Ted Jones. We have some items related to him in the collection as well. I learned as I was doing this, as I was preparing for this talk. And on the left, you see an example of one of the covers from Abdul Qadir al-Janabi's flagship publication, Al-Raghbah al-ibahiyah, Libertine Desire. Along the bottom, he's written, every cover has some kind of slogan, and it's surrealist. So I don't understand it. I wouldn't understand it if it was in English. It says "all power to General Snobbery" in Arabic there at the bottom of the cover here. You can see my cursor. The publications are full of things like this. They're fascinating. And the other thing that I want to express is that Yale, to my knowledge, is the only library that has copies of this periodical. It's more rare than the Gutenberg. I encounter this all the time. What does rare actually mean? Well, You know, there's a couple of dozen copies of the Gutenberg out there, but these are the only copies of al-Raghbah al-ibahiyah that are known. There's probably copies in people's closets, who knows? You can tell by looking at the covers that we're talking about a surrealist publication. The one on the right I really love. It says in French, if you like love, then you're gonna really love surrealism, which I think is pretty funny. But I mean, you know, you don't have to even guess to sort of figure from the artistic style what kind of publication this is. The other thing is, notice how it's so homemade. I mean, it's the little staples on the side. You can just see, you know, Abdulkader al-Janabi basically running these off on a photocopy machine and stapling them himself and distributing them somehow to his friends and the other contributors. So on the left is another cover from al-Raghbah al-ibahiyah, and on the right is a cover from Paradis. Paradis was actually published in Germany from the 90s. Paradis had a slightly different agenda from al-Raghbah al-ibahiyah. Al-Raghbah al-ibahiyah they're both surrealist. Raghbah al-ibahiyah is actually moderately or sometimes even quite pornographic in nature. So I have to be very careful when I choose images from this journal, from this periodical. Paradis is more literary. It's still surrealist, but its focus is literary and translations. They do things like this, like you see on the left. There's a pink slip that it says on the pink slip, this page can be read with the help of a mirror. And you may not be able to tell if you can't read Arabic, but the page on the left-hand side where my cursor is circling right now is Arabic written backwards. So they play all these kind of games with the people who are reading the periodical. I mean, they must have had a great time. The backwards text, I had to use a mirror to figure it out. It says 3 legal decisions of Ibn Hazm. So this little piece of writing is, you know, like I say, it's a surrealist interpretation of the writings of this Andalusian scholar. There's a statue of him I found. As you can see, he's 10th to 11th century scholar, considered a founder of comparative religion. I have no idea what the three legal decisions of Ibn Hazm would be, but they put that in there. They also interact with other European surrealist artists. So they provide, for example, translations into Arabic of some of these people who had not yet been translated, or else just publications in French, which many people in Arab countries do speak and read, of other surrealist European artists, in addition to showcasing the work of young Arab creatives who are also writing in this surrealist vein. And then also the other thing I noticed while looking at these physical objects is, you know, all of you probably are aware that, you know, of course, European languages are written left to right, and Arabic and Persian and other certain languages of Hebrew are written right to left in the opposite direction. In the periodical, they mix the directions up constantly, even from page to page. So this one opening, you have a text that you would read from right to left and another text that you would read from left to right. And then notice along the bottom, there's another text, if I can get my cursor to show up there. Along the bottom, you see this line. This is a line of text that runs from one page to the other throughout the whole issue of the journal. Just, you know, another little article that they just sort of presented in this way, you know, like a running title across the bottom page of the periodical. So it was challenging in many ways to engage with it. It includes a lot of artwork, some of it quite beautiful, like these that I specifically picked because they are so pretty. And I believe I'm nearly done. This is, there's Abdulkader again with his issue. I thought it was very interesting that Abdulkader al-Janabi, so he founded the surrealist movement, this Arab surrealist movement in Paris in the 70s. And he was completely ignorant of the fact that there had been a surrealist movement in Egypt right before and during the Second World War. He didn't know about the Art and Liberty group of Egyptian surrealists. And just for context, I provided a photograph. I mean, he learned about them after he started, but he didn't, this wasn't any kind of successor to the surrealist movement in Egypt. So that's the Egyptian group there on the left, and their founder, Georges Henin, is a very important Egyptian surrealist literary figure. This is one of the, on the right is one of the publications from this group. We have a copy of this in the Haas Family Arts Library. We have a copy of this publication. It is typographically very beautiful. It is completely surrealist. It's page after page of these enigmatic sayings rendered in both English and Arabic. That's Georges Hanin being a surrealist. He is being honored on the left in another little periodical published by Abdul Qadir al-Jannabi, which this particular journal was called The Desecrated Conscious. You know, it's surrealist, I don't know what it means. Then up here in the corner, it says the infiltrator issue, it is meant for stealing. So, you know, in other words, like if you remember, steal this book, you know, from the 60s. Okay, that's the end.